Welcome to the October Mental Health Forums. My name is Eve Positek and I'm the director of the Rush Wellness Program. Each October, in honor of World Mental Health Day, Rush takes time to discuss mental health issues relevant to our community to normalize mental health and promote suicide prevention. Over 700 Rush community members have joined our last two sessions, which are available now as recordings on our wellness website. We are thrilled to join you here today at Rush Copley. Before we begin, I want to name a couple housekeeping items for our folks both here in person and those online. First, everyone online and in person, please mute your devices to limit disruption throughout the event. We will save time for questions and answers at the end of each event. Please save your questions until this point. For those of us joining virtually, you are welcome to put your questions into the chat throughout the event. We will be holding a prize drawing at the end of each forum, including the opportunity to win a PTO day and other exciting prizes. This opportunity will be available after the Q&A portion of each event. The prize drawing will only be available to individuals who attend the event live. And finally, I just want to promote that the Healthy Mind Study is now available to Rush University students to share their feedback on Rush University's culture around mental health and suicide prevention. Study participants will be entered into a prize drawing for a Nintendo Switch or water bottles. Thank you again so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to introduce Mary Shlakaitis. Mary, will you come up and please introduce yourself to the community? Thank you.
All right, they're making it sound like there's lots here, and there are. We're super excited. So everybody knows there's over 100 people online, and we have a beautiful audience here with us today. And super excited to talk about taking a bite out of the sandwich generation. Amazing topic, really. And before we really get into it, I want to take a moment to introduce myself, and we'll introduce our panelists here today. As Eve said, I'm Mary Shlakaitis. I'm our Senior Vice President and Chief Operating Officer at Rush Copley. And I've been very involved in the Wellness Committee for the last several years and feel really thrilled that these forums are on our campus and available to all to hear as we are one Rush. I'm a nurse by background. I've been at Rush Copley over 20 years, and I like to say I can bring my heart to work every day. And I say that to people because I do feel like I've been fortunate to work in this nurturing environment, and we think about how we're taking time to pay attention to mental health issues. I know when I was a younger nurse, early in practice, it wasn't something that we could readily do, really. To be honest, we kind of just held our burdens in, and that's how we did it. We didn't know better. We didn't talk about it openly. So I think doing that here now is just a much better way, more modernized way to be. So taking a bite out of the sandwich generation, it's a big deal, right? Many of us are healthcare workers. We are caregivers at home or here at work. Maybe we have family members who might have medical, developmental, or mental health needs, and we're balancing a lot. And increasingly, we are dealing with aging parents. I know for me personally, I've lost my mom now, but I had her living with me in my home as she aged with Alzheimer's, and she lived with me for over 3 years. And that took a toll. And so again, we all have some understanding of what that might be like. So today, we're going to hear from an expert panel who are each going to introduce themselves shortly about how it has impacted them and how that impact of being a caregiver and what unique resources might be available to support work-life balance. So I think it's important that an outcome of today is that we learn together. So I'm going to get started here, and first we're going to ask Nicole to introduce herself and say a little bit about her background and where she's from and all of that.
Thank you so much. My name is Nicole Heath. I am an associate professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at Rush University in Chicago. I wear a couple of different hats in terms of teaching and supervising, but my primary work is I'm the director of our reproductive health psychology service. So I work primarily with folks who are pregnant and early in the postpartum period, trying to navigate the very difficult challenges of the transition to parenthood, because while it can be also very rewarding, it is filled with challenges and hard work. And we do a lot of work on helping prevent postpartum depression and things like that. And I'm a member of the sandwich generation as well, with young kiddos and Asian parents as well.
Thank you. Diane?
Hello all, I'm so happy to be here. I'm Diane Mariani. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I've been with Rush for about little over 6 years. I was previously a social worker in the Cancer Center, and that's a area of health that's very near and dear to my heart. And currently I am working with the Caring for Caregivers program at Rush, which is a program that is available to all Rush employees, but also to our community members, our patients who are family caregivers of older adults, somebody 60 years and older. And then also for our Cancer Center caregivers, we are actually working with caregivers that are caring for anyone of any age that's as an adult. We're not doing pediatrics right now, but so I'm really just happy to be here. This is an important topic for me. I am a family caregiver, both past and present, for my mom. And so I really have caregiving 24/7 is always with me.
Thank you. Omar?
Hello everyone, my name is Omar Ramos. I am the Program Development and Operations Manager for Waterford Place Cancer Resource Center. We provide wellness programming for cancer patients and their families, and that includes integrative oncology and complementary therapy solutions for individuals who are managing long-term symptoms coming from their cancer diagnosis and treatment. We do work specifically with the caregiver community at Waterford Place as well, so it's really great to be a part of this panel, to be able to share the experiences, the stories that I've encountered throughout my work with cancer patients specifically, but also being able to bring my own experience into this as a dad of 4 kids, and they always having some type of demand on you. So it's really good to be able to blend those different experiences and provide some insight into the conversation today.
And Matt?
Hello everyone, and hello everyone on Zoom. My name is Matt Tapuccio. I'm an assistant professor of health systems management here at Rush University downtown. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Eve, for having us. And like some others on the panel, I'm a new caregiver. I just had my first son 5 months ago, and so I am experiencing the stresses and demands firsthand of what it's like to have a new person in your household. So that's been a lot of fun, but an interesting challenge nonetheless. My background is in health services research, but in the health systems management department, I educate our future generation of healthcare administrators and leaders. And although we understand the stresses and challenges that clinicians are under, there is equal amounts of stress and pressure on the administrators and leaders in these hospitals, in the organizations we work in. And these challenges have been hitting close to home, seeing that the new students and the new generation of students and leaders in health systems are going to be facing similar challenges along the way. And I'm excited to understand and learn more from this panel today to understand what can we do as organizations to set our caregivers up for success on top of all the other demands that they have on a day-to-day basis. So thank you.
Thank you, Matt. And I think hearing from each of you just in your introduction centers us in just a little bit, and you can clearly hear we have quite a bit of talent here that we can talk with and about the sandwich generation. So the first question I kind of want to throw out to all of us, just to reorient and center us, is what is the sandwich generation and why is it happening? I don't know who wants to. Omar.
I'll go ahead and start off. The sandwich generation can be defined as individuals who are caring for an aging family member, so over 65 years old, while at the same time caring for young children under the age of 18, or also providing emotional or financial support for individuals that are older, so our grown adult children as well. That's the technical definition of what we find as the sandwich generation, individuals being pulled in between caregiving responsibilities between the parents and their own children. As to maybe why that's happening, we can see from some of the research that we have longer living family members, thank God. So our parents are living longer, and hopefully they're living with a better quality of life. And we also have families beginning at older ages. So, we're seeing more a trend away from the 18, 19, 20-year-olds starting their families to more now the 27, 28, 29, 30-year-olds having their first child. So there is a greater potential for these worlds to collide, and the needs to collide, and the demands and the pull on those individuals in the middle to be able to speak to both worlds.
Anybody else want to?
Yeah, that definition is really helpful to consider some of the trends of why this is looking maybe a little different now. I think it's just important to emphasize that even though we have a term for it now, this concept has always existed historically. For as long as people have been around, we've cared for our elders historically, and we've also tried to raise our children. And I think it's just getting a lot more attention now, especially since the pandemic. I feel like that really highlighted a lot of the ways that, especially in the early days of it, right, the chaos of trying to figure out how to keep our kids in classes and whatnot, created a lot of burden, and it highlighted the pressures this was under. And historically, this has often fell to the roles that women have historically filled. And as we know historically, a lot of that has been invisible labor. And so what we're talking about now is just shining a light on something that I think has always been there.
Yeah, the pressures, it's hard to know, are they greater or less than, but it seems to us who are here, we're motivated here to hear this conversation, that I don't think the pressures are going away. Do you want to shift to what the research is showing, or would you like to continue on that question?
I was just going to add that, and this kind of ties into research, or
Yeah.
statistics at least, that we just have an increased number of older adults as well. And so sometimes with aging, there's just a greater risk or likelihood perhaps of chronic disease and or additional needs that there might be some support that is needed for that. So that's another part that's impacting the increase in caregivers and increasing the spotlight on it, because we really don't have as a nation, even as a global, but as a nation we don't really have a system. Like, how is this going to be managed and supported? We don't have a very solid, stable, efficient, I could go on and on, long-term healthcare system in this country. And so the caregivers are the long-term healthcare system right now, the default system. And so by not addressing that, if we're not taking care of those folks that are caring for others, we're going to be in some trouble. And I think to what Nicole was saying is that it's been around a long time. This is not something new, but it's always, now it's getting a light, kind of some attention, thank goodness, because of all these factors. But, you have stressed and strained caregivers for a variety of reasons. There's also joy and rewards that come with, there's just those additional stressors. And then if you add a global crisis on top of that, that's the thing. So, we just need to have a system in place for support and well-being.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just, put, some final words on this topic, and to think about it from a healthcare organization perspective as well. And, the panel so far, we've been talking about the demographics of what these caregivers look like, but also to consider what are the workforce demographics that are both involved in this caregiving role now as well. Given the burdens that caregivers, clinicians, providers have in general throughout their days, and then to go home and then also be that caregiver on the side. And so it's around the clock care. And I think now more than ever, because of the pandemic and because of all these other situations that have arisen, it's really important now to really monitor what is going on with our employees and understanding what are the things that we need to be focusing on to maybe add more structure to this role, or to highlight the needs of the caregivers more specifically so that we can move forward and understand what are their needs specifically.
Yeah, I love that, and I think about our teams, and I think about supporting us as a group and team of caregivers, and even just simple things like checking in and just being kind to one another can be a form of support. So one of the things I think is even just acknowledging that there is a challenge, right? So what do our panelists have to say about what challenges do you have to navigate when you're talking about sandwich generation?
Well, I'm going to build off what Matt was saying too, specifically for healthcare workers. Our job is caregiving. We're here 8, 12 hours a day, pouring out of ourselves, doing a role that we professionally chose. However, then we transition to a home environment where maybe we didn't make a choice to be a caregiver. So now we're in a position where we're giving throughout the day, but then still come home and have to give even more. And that creates a lot of compassion fatigue, a lot of caregiver fatigue, where we find ourselves challenged in a way to think not only about what do all of these individuals that I care for need, but what do I need? And how do I find that time to look after myself? So there's time constraints, there's financial restraints, there's the fallout financially that can impact our caregivers, and say, okay, how do I navigate taking care of an aging parent who is now at home with me? Mary alluded to that earlier with her parents coming home to be with her. There's an increased cost that's associated with that. A lot of these things we don't even consider when we enter into the caregiving role. We just take it on because we know that's what needs to be done, and we sort of work with the fallout later. So there's some additional toll that takes place, not just from the compassion, financial needs, but also our self-care needs sort of seem to suffer through that piece as well.
Yeah, that's such an important piece, and it's a very common thing that we talk a lot about in therapy settings and wellness settings, that self-care is huge. It absolutely is. And I find that it's actually kind of a small piece of the pie when we recognize the financial burdens that can come with this, or if you have young kids, the costs of childcare and finding the time, and when you're emotionally really exhausted by the end of the day, you might not have the energy you wish you had to spend time with the people that you love the most. And this is really hard to just, I think it's but important to sort of recognize that like systemic and structural issues out there are a big factor in why this is so hard. And that doesn't negate the role of self-care, but I think what it does is maybe help us sort of acknowledge that they're not miracle cures that will magically make us feel better if we just somehow carve out a 25th hour out of the day or a 26th hour out of the day, because that can just start to feel like one more thing, one more person to care for. And I just want to recognize the challenge of that feeling.
I think that's a great comment, because it could be so simple as, okay, my self-care is I'll go to the gym, but that doesn't really cure all the dynamics that are going on, and I think that should be acknowledged.
I think one of the things I hear a lot from the caregivers that we support, and I think of it myself as a caregiver, I think the first thing is to be validated, and to be heard and to be listened to, because sometimes caregivers have been invisible within the healthcare system. So, you're escorting or joining your person for a visit, but you are not the patient, and so what's going on for you is not, being addressed. So, it's really important that we recognize caregivers, that we acknowledge them, that we validate whatever their experiences are, and they're very individual. Even though there's very common challenges among caregivers, they're very individual. And so what I really appreciate about Rush is that they are trying to look at that and offer supports, and recognizing that caregivers are important, that they are here, and they are among us in the employees. We recently started an employee resource group. I'm sure you're aware of the employee resource groups that are available, but we just started one for caregivers specifically, and that we had our initial meeting, I want to say it was last month, and there's another one coming up. Happy to send that information so that it can be put out on an email to the group that attended today. In case you want to join us, it's very, informal. We're just starting to form, but really it's caregivers of all kinds of just kind of gathering together to support one another and then offer resources, etc. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is that Rush has invested in is our Caring for Caregivers program, which actually does specifically address the individual needs of caregivers and is available for employees. So sometimes it's really just about knowing what are the options. Like, I need to talk to somebody, I need a sounding board where I can say, this is what's going on for me, and have somebody else kind of help me sort out how to prioritize, even as a healthcare worker. So I have responsibilities at work, I have responsibilities as a caregiver. How do I manage all that and then take care of myself? So sometimes it's just really talking it through and finding out what works for me. Maybe I can't go to the gym, but am I able to, do a little walking in the basement or whatever, or at Rush, there's a lot of room to walk around in the hospital setting. So things like that.
And some of those resources are on the back table as well, correct? That
Yeah, they are.
And so, to Diane's point, thinking about caregivers and using the language that we use to describe them as informal caregivers, I think is a little bit interesting as well. I think what Diane's doing and the work that she's been building on is formalizing the role more so. It's understanding what these individual needs are of the caregivers, whether you're caring for a patient that has cancer, whether it's an older adult patient with Alzheimer's or dementia. Each patient has so many needs and different challenges that it's hard to define a caregiver as one such thing, or to have a single set of tasks, because the needs are so multifaceted for each person that it's really important to have a variety of different resources available to these individuals and these caregivers to understand that there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach that can address all the needs of both the caregivers and the patients that they're caring for, the loved ones. And so I really want to applaud Diane and her work in doing that, so that's fantastic.
Yeah, and you think about that, who is notoriously not good at taking care of themselves, but healthcare worker caregivers. So I love that we're just talking about it, because I think this gives voice to express, and that can help some, even in and of itself.
And to kind of jump off of what Matt was just saying there, it really just, the way you phrase that highlighted something that's really powerful that I emphasize a lot to my own patients, and I try to remind myself of, is language really matters. And there is something very empowering sometimes about saying, this is a job. Like, what we do here when we come to work, yes, we know this is our job, but caregiving is a job. And it sometimes might feel a little odd to think of our children or our parents as work, and not in a negative way or anything, but just to recognize it is work. My patient population is often, young new parents, and whenever I ask them, like, what do you do for work? Oh, I don't work. I'm just a stay-at-home parent. And there's always a part of me that, kind of ruffles at that feeling, because part of me is like, no, you're working very, very hard too.
Sometimes harder,
seen.
right?
Yeah, and it's not seen.
I'll make a comment about that as well. I mean, anybody who has children, you know how much you love them, and you care for them, and you pour your heart, your soul, your blood, sweat, tears out to make experiences for them that hopefully will give them the tools that they need to become well-adjusted and happy individuals as they move forward in life. But as Nicole was saying, we don't often, it can create an internal struggle to not see the people that we care for as the problem for our stress. And we don't want to say that sometimes, and it's hard to say, hey, I'm struggling because I'm taking care of you, whoever those people are. And I think that's something that we all as caregivers, whether we are simply taking care of children, or we're taking care of elderly parents, or we're in the sandwich, we're taking care of all of them. we don't feel empowered to be able to acknowledge our own emotions and struggles as we go through this experience. And that causes quite a significant amount of emotional damage and takes quite its toll on us, where we're unable to reach out and connect, even if it's to a trusted friend. Reach out, find someone, connect to a support person. Those are those key points. I think acknowledging that fact and saying, hey, I don't want to think of those individuals as my burden. I want to continue to be inspired to serve them and use that as a platform to find joy. And, although 47% of Americans find themselves in this caregiver sandwich generation, a great majority of them still are just as happy as anyone else. We talked about the rewards of caregiving just briefly, and all that comes along with it and how enriching it can be. I found very interesting that the data found that although these individuals are stressed to the max, I mean, we're talking about individuals between the ages of 40 and 60, they're in the middle of their careers, they're starting families, they're doing all of these things, yet they still find themselves just as happy as some of their single comparisons, those people who may be not doing all that. So I was like, wow, they're doing all of this, but they're just as happy. So it speaks volumes to the dimensions of what you get back by being a caregiver and someone who's deeply involved in connecting to your family in that way.
Go ahead.
And I'll just add to that, so yes, happy, and maybe even fulfilled, and it's very rewarding, but it's also maybe not something that's sustainable, as far as like the challenges of it, right? So, and then also kind of mentioning that not all relationships are easy. Not all relationships are, are congenial, whatever word I'm trying to find here. So sometimes some of our caregivers are now faced with caring for, let's just say, an older adult, a parent that they didn't have a good relationship with. Maybe it was an abusive relationship for them, but they are an only child or the only one even somewhat willing to provide the care. So there's another level of difficulty and challenge there. And even if it wasn't just all those things. Sometimes family dynamics plays a big part. So generally when you're caring for your children, you're the ones that kind of have the main say in what happens or the care. But when you're caring for an older adult parent, there may be others involved, and then family dynamics come in play. We work a lot with that as well. So just thinking of intersectionality, we know there's also a lot of caregiving dyads. They're not as maybe welcome or seen or understood or heard as others. We know that there's a lot of institutional racism. There's ageism. There's all those things. All the isms are there. So that also comes into play, and it's important to recognize that these are all these unique situations that have to be really just kind of addressed, and how do we support the best we can for all those areas.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think, Matt, you probably have more to add from your research as well.
Yeah, in continuing with this theme of what the challenges look like, knowing that about 1 in 5 Americans are caregivers. And
It's pretty staggering.
And knowing that statistic alone, made me want to dive a little bit deeper into what we know about caregivers and how they're integrated into our health systems. And when the pandemic, happened a few years ago, when it started, this was a topic of interest for a lot of people, given the mental health burden of not just the employees of health systems, but also those who were caring for those that were sick at home. And what we were starting to learn is that we need to do a lot more to support informal caregivers. We need to actually understand more what their roles look like in the health system as well. Given what Diane is saying, given the challenges that each person brings to the table, it necessitates that we as employees and as organizations that have an understanding of what those challenges look like, so that we can provide the informational needs, the technical needs, and the skills training necessary to support those that are caring for those with a mental disease. And so from a health services standpoint, you're kind of addressing two needs. You're addressing the needs of the caregiver, but also those of the patient. Because at the end of the day, if you have a satisfied patient or addressing the needs of the patient and the caregiver as well, that seems like a win-win from an organizational standpoint. But we have a scarcity issue. We don't have enough employees to provide the level of care necessary. And so that burden does fall on to our family members and our loved ones to address those needs. But we're just starting to scratch the surface in terms of how can we do a better job of integrating those individuals as team members, with the physicians, with the nurses that are seeing these patients every time they come in for a visit or virtually. What are the roles of the caregivers in caring for and addressing the needs of the patients as they are going through the continuum of care? And that is, it's almost not like a challenge we want to present to the audience here, or some kind of call to action, but it kind of is in terms of
I think so.
what do we have to do from a next step standpoint to address those needs of those individuals.
That's great.
As far as defining those needs, hearing what you were saying there, Matt, it's reminding me that we talk about caregiving as kind of an umbrella term, and I think sometimes that might conjure this image of what we do with patient care, which might be more physical caregiving. And if you have really young kids, you're doing a lot of physical work. If you have an older parent or family member who has mobility issues, that caregiving is physically challenging as well. And one of the reasons, though, I think that caregiving is invisible is we very, very easily underestimate the mental labor. So who's got what appointment where? Is the soccer uniform clean? Who is the laundry done? When's this appointment? What time do I have to leave? And where's this appointment? The mental gymnastics just to hold that, and that's kind of running in the background of caregivers' brains almost all the time. And if you've ever found yourself at work working with a patient or doing one of your administrative tasks, and in the back of your head you're also planning your grocery list, or you're trying to think about what time is it and am I going to be there in time for pickup at school, right? That's a lot of work. I've often described it as, think about your laptop or your phone or something. If there's an app running in the background, you might be really surprised sometimes how quickly your battery drains. And you might think, I just charged this thing. What is going on? I just got a good night's sleep. Why am I still so drained? I've just been awake for 20 minutes. And it's because we don't see that that's running in the background. And that's a very important task. It needs to be done by somebody in the family. And I just want to, if there's a way to shine a spotlight on that and validate, like there's a reason you feel this way. It's not because you're failing at this. It's not because you're doing a bad job. It's because this matters to you and you care. And it's just a piece that is hard to say.
I love that analogy about the app in the background, and I know you've all scrolled through your phone and shut down all the apps, and like there's 30 up, right? So it does drain the battery, and I think that's a good view into it. What else?
I was just sitting here thinking, I would love to, I know maybe I'm stepping out here, but I would love to really know how many caregivers we have in the
audience.
Our audience right now. I don't know if
I love that question.
If we could do it, yeah. And
I
Yeah.
mean, come on, you all work
Yeah.
here. Like, raise your hands.
And I'll just say, sometimes there's like not an identification of that, that's another thing that I find quite a bit when working with caregivers. They don't identify as a caregiver. I'm not a caregiver.
Yeah.
This is my
It's
mom.
true.
I'm not a caregiver. This is my spouse or what have you. And so that's part of it too. And just the idea of like, as we explore and we see, what are your needs or how can we support you or what's happening, it's really very difficult sometimes to say, this is really stressful, this is a burden for me. I'm worried about my own retirement because, my money is just going now to care for, and there's that conflict, within of like, as a family member or whatever, whatever the cultural obligation, sometimes it's filial piety that you're following, and that's very important, and it's embedded. So I'm trying to meet that, but this is my reality, and I mean, what do I do with all that? What do I do with that feeling of like, I can't, who do I say to do I say to my doctor, my mom is a burden? You can't even say those words out of your mouth, so that's another, piece to consider.
The chat is kind of picking up too with people acknowledging their role in caregiving, and we have one saying, I'm a mom of 2 young kids and a husband with disabilities. And so I know if you kind of get quiet for a moment and think what you do, I know a lot of you out there have a lot of stressors in your life, and yet you still show up to give more care when you're here at work.
And one more thing to Diane's point, and it was funny as you were describing this about identifying as a caregiver, and some people are reluctant to do that. And this isn't a plug, I'm not being paid to say anything like this, but there are resources like the National Alliance for Caregiving. And there was some stats presented there that although about 18% of workplaces offer programs to support caregivers, such as flex time, free needs assessments, including leave as well to support a caregiver, only 2% of employees are actually using them or making use of them. And that statistic alone made me want to dive deeper into what can the employees at Rush do, or what resources are out there for staff that are also caregivers. And I would encourage everyone to do the a few Google searches here and there to identify what types of programs might be beneficial for your needs and for your situation. But I found that to be very interesting, that there might even still be a stigma around asking for help in this space. And I think the panel here would be very supportive of just going out there and seeing what is out there that can help you.
I love that. We're kind of down to maybe about 6 minutes left, so I want to acknowledge that, and I want to throw out a final question to each of our panelists. And I would like to ask, what advice would you want to give to any caregiver or someone who cares for a caregiver, and what we want this group to walk away with today? What's your kind of final words?
Well, Matt set me up really well for this, because what he just described is something that I wanted to leave you with, was the fact that, yes, the services and the support are there both from an employer perspective, but also from a community perspective, but we don't take advantage of it. Now, there's several reasons. They could be practical or they could be emotional. One thing that I would always recommend, and I leave a parting thought with you all, is to know that by acknowledging that you need to take time for yourself in order to be a better caregiver, that doesn't express or indicate that you are inadequate in any way, or that your ability to care for someone that you love is inadequate in any way. It just simply is acknowledging that, as Nicole mentioned, our battery is low and it needs to be recharged. So when you take that time for yourself, whether it's through school, or it might be a community partnership, maybe someone in your church that you have, a sibling, or when appropriate, even respite care services for someone to come in and give you an hour or 2 hours off. Take that time to do something that recharges your battery, not another caregiving activity. Take that time to really just plug in, recharge, rest, refuel, and find your center.
I like that. Very nice.
I really like those examples, and I'll kind of throw in an added, maybe not so commonly shared thing, but don't judge whatever those activities are that you have. So if you just like scrolling through your phone and
That's
social
okay.
media, do it. If that feels good to kind of turn your brain off and do something simple, that counts.
But not in the middle of the night when I'm sleeping and I wake up, right?
Yeah, that's
a bad habit I have.
Yeah, to unplug your phone from the charger to
Right.
do that, yeah. In terms of final recommendations or ways to think about this, a term that I use a lot in my clinical work is one called radical acceptance. And what radical acceptance is the recognition that I'm seeing the world, the reality of my situation with my eyes wide open. I'm not in denial. I'm not sitting here trying to do the toxic positivity thing of saying everything's fine when it's not. Acknowledge that it's hard. It's okay. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. But acknowledge, as Omar was saying earlier, that it's actually really rewarding. We do this because we care. We do it because it matters. So validating that it is hard and that I care about it and that it's deeply aligned with what my values are. It doesn't change the burden, but it prevents us from trying to act perfect or feel like I have to keep the 30 things I'm juggling all in the air all at once. If something drops, it drops, and it'll be okay.
Very nice. I like that.
I'll just add, for caregivers, you're not alone. We get you. And we're here for you, you know, and open to ideas, like what can we do, what more do we need to do, or what are the needs, and let's see how we can pull together and address those. Love to be a part of that conversation.
Matt, do you have anything final?
Coming from more of an academic standpoint, I truly believe that if there are people in this room or on the call, on the Zoom, that if you have a solid, good, strong relationship with your superior, your supervisor, your boss, your manager, and you're having these challenges and you're having trouble navigating them, it helps to go and share those troubles, those difficulties with that individual. Because as we know as caregivers and some new caregivers, that if you allow some of these challenges to go unaddressed for a long time, it does eventually start to not just seep into your personal lives, but also your work lives as well. And so I really do encourage those that are having a hard time on their own to address some of these challenges that we've discussed today to seek out and lean on your peers as a way to begin the conversation to address some of those needs on top of all the excellent resources that have already been provided.
Well, if nothing else, we created community today with all the connectivity that I'm seeing in the chat as well. So thank you all. Eve, do you want to move us to the next section here?
Yes, thank you all so much for such a terrific panel. I want to open now both to our folks here in person and to our folks online the opportunity to ask some questions. I also do want to clarify the large QR code, hopefully both available online and, thanks so much, Oscar, online and in person here is how you enter the raffle for the PTO day or other fun prizes.
Very important.
Very important. Can I open up the questions here in person?
Oh, right here. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. Not so much a question, I'm sorry, not so much a question. I just also want to add, I've experienced being a caregiver, working 12 hours at night, going home, taking care of my grandpa physically, and then now being a single mom with 3 kids, you know, working 12 hours nights, going home and taking care of kids. It's, what I can add to it is that I don't know if that's something I made up or it's already out there, but that caregiver guilt. You have the resources, we know about it, let's say we need 2 hours of time to go out with friends, but you feel guilty. You feel guilty to have fun because, oh my gosh, I'm a mom, I'm supposed to take care of my kids. What am I going out with my friends, you know, having fun like that? But being a single mom, and I actually went out to do it, I'm like, I don't care if I feel guilty or what others will say, and going out and having fun and coming home, you feel like a better person, you feel rejuvenated, and you're not as stressed with your kids, you are actually more patient because, like you said, you have refilled that battery in yourself. So I think normalizing that, acknowledging caregiver guilt, and that shouldn't be an issue. Like, you should go past that and go out and do it and have fun. And, you know, in spite of all the 30 stressors in your life, you need to do that in order to be refilled and be a better caregiver. Because even if we know the resources out there, we don't utilize them because of that caregiver guilt. It stops us from doing it. So I think acknowledging that it's okay, you don't have to be guilty about it, you need it, is helpful.
That's beautifully stated, and I think the panelist is all nodding.
Yes.
And I just wanted to add, thank you so much for sharing that. That's a huge topic in and of itself. And I love your example about how even though you feel guilt in going out and doing that, that even just your own personal experience is showing you, it makes me better for this. And so guilt is such a tricky word, because I always like to remind people, feeling guilty and being guilty are not the same thing. And just because I feel guilty is not meaning I'm doing something wrong, but that emotion is so painful that it can stop you from doing that thing, like taking care of yourself. So if it helps, if it's a little mental shortcut to say, oh, well, me going out is actually taking care of my family then.
Yes.
Use that if that's the easier
Flip
way
it,
to
flip it,
maybe,
right?
yeah, to undermine the guilt feeling so it doesn't stop you from doing that.
There's no
Thank
shortage
you so
of
much
guilt.
for sharing.
Yeah, it was beautiful. Who else? Anybody else?
A question online, and then another here in person, is around whether the panel has advice on how to best navigate caregiving from a distance. This individual has a 90-year-old mom who's independent but is starting to struggle and need more help. The individual is in Vermont, and the person on the panel is in Chicago. Any advice?
Yeah, I would just say, you know, I'm going to welcome that person to reach out to the Caring for Caregivers program so that we can support you, because we do work with long distance caregiving. It's definitely very unique, and it's got its own challenges. We probably have to delve a little bit more to know how we can support you and what resources we can connect you with. And so I'd love to have that opportunity.
Is there an email, Diane, for that program?
Yes, it's caregivers@rush.edu.
Perfect, thanks so much.
And we had a question here.
Hi, yes, I'm an employee, of course you know, of Rush. I work at Rush downtown Chicago, and I live in Chicago, and I'm a caregiver for my 20-year-old granddaughter. She decided when she turned 18 that she wanted to live with me, and she has physical challenges, and it basically changed my whole life, because I had to start arranging things. Considering her, I couldn't just go out and do the things that I wanted to do that I was doing before, and starting to travel more with friends. So it changed everything, but she's always been a blessing to our family. So I appreciate her. But I took the time out today because we do need to take time out for ourselves to come out, and I'm like, I'll take the drive. I want to get out and go in person opposed to doing it online or virtually. So, and I also wanted to just make a comment that someone said something about your patients that may have a caregiver. I think it would be really helpful to provide resources to that patient's caregiver and get them connected.
Very nice,
You know,
yes.
it really is. Thank you.
Very nice.
Yeah, and to add on that, thank you for taking the drive out
Yeah,
here.
I'm
Yeah.
so glad you did. Welcome, welcome. Kathy, welcome for you.
Myself, it took me about 50 minutes from downtown to get here as well, and fortunately the traffic wasn't too bad. But to your point, I think it's really important now that as employees, as providers now, that we have to understand that we're actually helping ourselves by helping the caregivers, because caregivers are providing important information. They fill the gaps of what the patient may not be able to communicate to the provider. So they are playing an integral role, whether they realize it or not, in helping understand what are the challenges, but also what could be some of the solutions. Because you understanding the context of your home, of your granddaughter, understanding what her needs are specifically, helps transform that conversation to more, what are the action items that we can do as a team? What can I do as an individual, or what we can do as a caregiving team to address those needs. And I think having those conversations are hard, they're time pressed, there's not a lot of opportunities for that. But if, as providers, we just make a mention or iterate that this is something that's important to us and that we need to understand as well, I think that just opens the doors for caregivers to open up that line of communication. I think that's really important.
How are we doing, Eve? One more question?
One more question. So does the panel have any advice on navigating transitioning from a caregiver role? Maybe that aging parent has reached the end of their life, or perhaps a young child is now becoming independent.
This is a little bit outside of the scope of what I often work with. I usually work with patients, for example, on the transitioning into caregiving in terms of becoming a new parent, for example. The idea of transitioning out of caregiving for a lot of people represents a loss and is it's basically a grief coping process, and everybody manages grief differently. So if a loved one passes away, there's a lot of rituals and cultural practices we might have that are aimed at helping us sort of cope and move forward in our lives. But some losses are kind of bittersweet, right? If our children have grown and they've left home and they've started college or gone off to a job, this is both heartbreaking and exactly what you were preparing your kids for. So I also have, a couple of years ago, my own father passed away as well, and after a very long, slow battle with a terminal cancer. And in the process, there was a mix of obviously a lot of grief and sadness, and it felt kind of weird to say, but some kind of relief as well, that this was a hard thing for everybody, and I don't wish and I'm not happy that that had to happen, but it was recognizing that grief can also sometimes come with, it's okay to acknowledge that you have more space now, and it's kind of the other side of that coin that can feel really hard to acknowledge. So if part of the ending of that caregiver role was hard, that you might feel some relief, and that is okay. Like all of this, it's very, very nuanced and complicated, and we have resources if you're looking for therapy or someone you can talk to in a professional context. We have those services at Rush as well.
Thank you. So Eve, I'm seeing a lot of great things on our chat, and I want to make sure that you all hear. They're saying this is amazing. Thank you for taking the time and committing to these forums. So
Thank you everyone for coming today. This concludes our mental health forum today. I hope that you'll all consider joining us virtually or in person at Rush University Medical Center next week. October 24th, 12 to 1. We'll be in Brainerd, and we'll be discussing inclusion and mental health. Thank you.
all right, thanks everybody. Thank you, panelists.